So I want you to imagine for a moment that you are the CEO of a company, or you're the HR person who's responsible for the hiring process at your company. And you're in the midst of doing a new slate of hires, and so you're the person who's going to look through resume after resume after resume, and your job is to find the best person. Your job is to find, out of all the names and all the resumes, who is the greatest. What is it you're looking for? When you're looking for someone who is the greatest, what is it you're looking for?
Who knows the job the best?
Who knows the job the best? Okay.
Positive.
Someone who's positive.
Someone who's James Saunders.
Why? So if you see the name James Saunders, doesn't matter if it's this one. They have that name.
You're the one that.
Yeah. They are qualified. They are the greatest. Okay.
Dependable.
Dependable.
Honest.
Dependable and honest.
Tall.
I just said someone who talks. Yeah. Yes. What else? What other traits?
Someone who will get the job done.
Somebody who can get the job done.
Good communicator.
Good communicator. What else might you look for?
Past experience.
Their past experience. Performance. Anything else you can think of?
Reliable.
Reliable, their education. Yeah, the school that they went to. I want you to hold that for a little while. When it comes to greatness, this is one way that we might define it. As we continue to move through the Gospel of Matthew, which we're spending most of this year on up until Advent in December, and we're going to skip ahead a couple of chapters to chapter 18. This is commonly referred to as the community discourse, meaning that this is a chapter that a lot of folks look to for how Jesus calls us to live in community with one another. And so we're going to spend the next few weeks just in chapter 18. Last week we talked about why you should never hike with Chacos. If you missed it, don't ever hike in Chacos. You'll lose a toe or part of one. But really, the heart of that story was Jesus telling the disciples about his upcoming death and resurrection. He does that. And then we skip to this section. They're in Capernaum now, and he's just done it a second time. Jesus just foretold of his death and resurrection a second time. And throughout the Gospel of Matthew, time and time again, one of the things Jesus talks about more in this Gospel than any of the other Gospels is the kingdom of heaven. Up until this point, he's talked about it 34 times. And so on the minds of the disciples is Jesus' death and resurrection, but also this conversation about kingdom life. And that's where this morning's story picks up. It says, the disciples came up to Jesus with the question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus called for a little child to come and stand among them. And then Jesus said, the truth is, unless you change and become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Those who make themselves as humble as this child are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. This is the good news, the gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
If you were to compile a list of the greatest selling self-help books of all time, and then you were to make a top 10 list, here are a couple of the books that would appear in reverse order. One of the top 10 books is Who Took My Cheese? Or Who Moved My Cheese? Who Moved My Cheese? I'm not denying it's not. Written in the late 1990s, sold about 23 million copies to date. Another one that's really popular is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You'll know this here. Y'all listen up. Also written in the late 1990s, about 25 million copies sold. One that surprised me, again, late 1990s, for whatever reason, there's a big boom right there. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 26 million copies. Anybody guess what the number one is?
I think
Close. Think and Grow Rich, written in 1937, over 8 million copies sold. But you notice, probably number 11 on the list was the book that's missing, which is To Become Great, You Should Become Like a Child. They're going to spin off multiple editions. They're going to make a continuing adaptation for it. But when you think about this list, you see traits like how to be a better person, how to adapt and implement change, how to get wealthy, how to gain more power, how to create life-altering, life-giving habits. The list goes on. I imagine in most of these books you won't see a chapter on how to take a step backward and become like a child. Not typically something we think of when it comes to self-help or becoming great. So what is Jesus up to in this story? Why is he telling the disciples that unless you change and become like a child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven? One thing to notice, because we sometimes mix up this story with another one, is Jesus is not telling them to have faith like a child. Instead, he's telling them to become like a child. In the midst of this, remember, Jesus has been preaching and teaching nonstop about the kingdom of heaven. So the disciples pose this question: who is the greatest in the kingdom? More so, what does it mean to be great? And it's not that unusual of a question when you think about it. For in any new situation or setting, and this kingdom that Jesus is talking about is certainly a new setting, people want to gain a sense of our place and our standing and our status. And we feel more comfortable when we know the rules of the environment and have figured out the pecking order. Even if we don't like the pecking order or think it's unfair, we still feel better knowing and understanding the parameters of the setting and the situations we're in. And so the disciples come up to Jesus and they pose this question of what it takes to be great. And so in response, he brings a child. This isn't the story where he sets him on the lap. He brings a child into the center of the community. And while it may be tempting to get all sentimental, we should remember that in the first century, children had no power, no wealth, no status. They were truly dependent on the parents and the people around them. So they had no economic or societal value. And this doesn't mean that their parents didn't love them, because of course they did. But it's more the simple recognition that for most of the world's history, children were an economic liability until they could work and generate income. And so as a result, they had no standing in the ancient world, no material value, and no power. And so this child represents vulnerability and need and utter dependence of all children of that day. When Jesus calls a child to come forward, he is both metaphorically and literally inviting a person from the margins to stand at the center of community. In our culture, being humble typically implies not being boastful, though you may have a ton of reason to be. But the humility that Jesus demands is something else entirely. Like a child in the disciples' midst, those who are humble have few options and little power. They live at the mercy of other people's choices. Such humility is the opposite of the status and power the disciples crave. Jesus' response does not replicate imperial domination. He is not who they thought he would be. They're used to the way that power was conquered in Rome. But Jesus did not come as a military conqueror or a successful king or a ruling emperor, as was the model for greatness. And so it's giving up claims to power and status and knowing one's total dependence on God that counts as greatness in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus places the most vulnerable and powerless members of society at the very center of this Christian community. And he tells them that welcoming these people, welcoming these children, welcoming people who are on the margins is to also welcome him. And that is what Jesus says will count for greatness in the kingdom. It's not military power or physical might. It's not athletic prowess or great beauty. It's not wealth or societal standing or fame or any of the other things that they or we are likely to equate with greatness. But rather, it's vulnerability and need and dependence. Greatest constitutes those who recognize their need for God and for each other. Like Jesus' disciples, we fail to process Jesus' teaching because our own concerns drown them out. We worry that our churches are too empty or that in the U.S. the church has lost too much power. Yet Jesus' words show that we are paying attention to the wrong thing. The greatest in the kingdom of heaven are not those with the largest building or the most average worship attendance on Sunday or those with the biggest budgets. The greatest in God's kingdom are those who know how little is under their control and who focus on loving and serving people in need instead of promoting themselves. So today, in this time and place, Jesus invites us to become like little children. trusting in God and following Jesus in the self-emptying way of love. Amen.
Amen.